This episode includes an apparition story from the Way of the M Trail, plus a reading from my book, The Constant Procession. But before this, for those of you just subscribing to these podcasts, here is a bit of background about my book, The Very Fine Light. The Very Fine Light is a contemporary novel with Christian themes about a village on the verge of bankruptcy, the mayor with a secret, and Randy, a fun-loving co-worker who's always in trouble for telling it like it is. Oh, one other thing. For those of you currently reading my book, The Very Fine Light, please, when you finish it, do go to the book's Amazon.com page and rate it. I have a link at nicosteves.com that will get you to the page on Amazon. I need several dozen additional ratings in order to raise the visibility of the book on Amazon. Plus, the Way of the M pilgrimage takes place all across France on May 26th. A 14th century monk, Gregory Palamas, observed about the Madonna that, quote, while on the earth, she hearkened and obeyed heavenly things rather than things earthly, unquote. And also in the words of an Orthodox Archbishop, John Maximovich, who lived from 1896 to 1966, and I quote him, the end of the earthly life of the Virgin Mary was the beginning of her greatness, unquote. I'm going to read from my book, The Constant Procession, the story of La Salette. On a remote mountaintop in 1846, the Madonna appeared to Melanie Calvat, a 14-year-old teenager, and Maximin Gurvard, just 11 years old. By age 14, Melanie had a troubled soul. Born into a very large, very poverty-stricken family, at times she had to beg for money to help her family survive. She found little love or attention from her parents. Her personality had become somewhat embittered, a characteristic that followed Melanie for her whole life. At the time of her apparition, she did not like being around people, and had found the perfect job of tending cows up in the mountains. Maximin did not like to be alone. This may be why he ignored Melanie's off-putting behavior until she agreed to let him tag along with his cows. They had known each other just a few days. While tending their cows near the village of La Salette, about 100 miles from Grenoble, France, Maximin and Melanie climbed the hill to the place called the Fountain of Men, on the left bank of a stream that is there. Near the fountain, the children sat and ate their noonday meal of bread and cheese. Two boys and a girl, who had been watching over their cows in the dale lower down, arrived at the fountain and stopped for a brief visit. After they had left, Maximin and Melanie descended a few feet and crossed a stream, near a pile of stones, and close by, an empty hollow of a dried-up stream, which flowed after melting snow or an abundant rainfall. It had been called the Little Fountain. The next day, September 20th, it would be observed the dried-up fountain that never flowed past June had begun to flow again. Near this little fountain, the two children rested and fell asleep. How long it is not certain, half an hour perhaps, or 3/4 of an hour, maybe more. In any case, Melanie awoke and called Maximin. Merman, let us go find our cows. I cannot see them anywhere." Unable to see their cows, they ran up the slope to search for them. But the cows had not wandered far. Melanie began to go back down to the waterless fountain to gather the scraps from their lunch before tending to the cows. Halfway down, she paused, dumbstruck and fearful. "Merman," she called out, "look at that great light over there." "Where is it?" the boy replied as he ran over to her. At the very spot where they had slept, they spotted a globe of fire. In the children's words, it was as if the sun had fallen there. The light swirled, then grew in size, and, opening, disclosed within it a woman, seated, her head in her hands, her elbows on her knees, in the attitude of one grief-stricken. Melanie, in her fright, raised her hands up and dropped her shepherd's staff. Maximin at first thought of defense. "Keep your stick," he said to her. "I will keep mine, and we will give it a good whack if it does anything to us." Even after she conversed with them, the children could not identify their visitor, and they spoke of her as the beautiful lady. The beautiful lady now stood up, while the children remained transfixed where they were. "Come near, my children. Be not afraid. I am here to tell you great news," she said to them. Reassured by those words, the children hurried to meet her. Her voice, they said, was like music. They approached so near her that, as they later expressed it, another person could not have passed between them and her. The lady also took a few steps towards them. They looked at her and noticed that she did not cease weeping all the time she spoke to them. As Maximine put it, she was like a mama whom her own children had beaten and who had escaped to the mountains to weep. The beautiful lady stood tall and seemed to be made of light, dressed like a woman of the region with a long dress, an apron almost as long as the dress, a shawl knotted in the back, and a cap or bonnet similar to the ones worn by peasant women. Roses crowned her head, while another wreath of roses adorned the edges of her white shawl, and a third garland surrounded her shoes. Over her brow shone a light in the form of a headdress. Meanwhile, the two witnesses stood still at the spot where the conversation had taken place. All of a sudden, they realized their visitor had taken some steps away from them. In their eagerness to join her again, they ran across the brook to catch up with her. As the lady moved along, she seemed to glide over the tips of the grass without touching until she reached the top of the hill where the children had gone to look for their cows. Melanie preceded her by a few steps. Maximine stood at her right. Once at the summit, the lady paused for a few seconds, and then began to rise up to a height of about 4 feet. She remained suspended in the air for a moment, raised her eyes to heaven, and then glanced in the direction of the southeast. At that moment, Melanie, who had been to the left of the lady, came in front in order to see her better. At the time, she noticed the Madonna had ceased weeping, although her features remained very sad. The Madonna now began to disappear. We saw her head no more, then the rest of her body no more. She seemed to melt away. There remained a great light, Maximine related, as well as the roses at her feet, which I tried to catch with my hands, but there was nothing more. We looked for a long time, Melanie added, to see if we could not have another glimpse of her, but the beautiful lady had disappeared forever. The little shepherd then remarked to her companion, "Perhaps it was a great saint." "If we had known it was a great saint," said Maximine, "we would have asked her to take us with her." In his book, The Final Hour, author Michael H. Brown wrote, "Mary spoke with great concerns on the direction that the world was taking, an egocentric emphasis on the success of human invention at the expense of religious beliefs, and with the popularization of the wondrous new technology through use of brain alone, then becoming man's chief preoccupation. Also, the Lady of La Salette foresaw, as the holy faith of God is forgotten, every individual will wish to be his own guide and be superior to his fellow men. The Madonna also predicted that the harvest would fail. In December 1846, most of the popular crops had become disease-stricken, and in 1847 a famine hit Europe, which resulted in the loss of around 1 million lives, estimated to have been 100,000 in France alone. She also predicted that the state of religion in France and the world, within both the civilian population and church hierarchies of priests and bishops, would weaken and suffer because of many sinful acts from laity and clergy. Wars and tribulations would occur if mankind did not repent. During interrogations from the local authorities, the authorities took the children back to the site of the apparition. A man broke off a piece of rock at the spot of the lady's appearance and uncovered a spring. People came to the spring and believed it had the power to heal. Testimonials inspired the area bishop to begin an official inquiry into the merits of this apparition. Our Lady of La Salette still draws people, many who seek her grace and value her pledge to take their prayers to her Son. Here, too, one can witness an endless procession of people who gravitate to the Madonna on any given day. On September 18, 1851, Bishop Philbert de Bruyère, Ordinaire of Grenoble, issued his doctrinal pronouncement, quote, "We judge that the apparition of the Blessed Virgin to two shepherds on village of La Salette, September 19, 1846, on a mountain of the Alpine chain situated in the parish of La Salette of the Archbishopry of Corps, bears all characteristics of truth, and that the faithful have grounds for believing it to be undeniable and certain." 3 years later, in 1853, Bishop Lenthra of Birmingham, England, described the subordinate role of an apparition and its concrete influence on the history of our salvation. Quote, "The apparition of our Mother on the mountain of La Salette is not a new doctrine, it is a new grace. It is the revelation of the love and compassion for us that exists in heaven." And in 1996, Pope John Paul II reflected on La Salette, quote, "As I wrote on the 150th anniversary of Our Lady, La Salette is a message of hope, for our hope is nourished by the intercessions of her who is Mother of mankind. May the proclamation of this hope always be at the heart of your encounters with men and women. Through this hope, our contemporaries can be assured that divisions are not irreparable and that it is always possible to repent of one's infidelities in order to build a reconciled humanity and to follow the Lord, for nothing is beyond God's reach." Well, this is Nico Steves. I hope you enjoyed this installment. My book can be found using the title The Very Fine Light on Amazon.com. Please feel free to contact me at nicosteves.com. That's Nikos Steves, Steves.com. If you like this episode, and for more, share them with friends. This is Nico Steves. Thank you. See you next time.